Hare Krishna. So we are continuing our first chapter from Easy Journey to Other Planets book. The first chapter titled Anti-Material Worlds. So let me just share my screen. Yes. Yesterday we covered, previously we covered um, there was a news release where some scientists had like they proposed that there is some anti-material world, anti-matter particle, and Prabhupada mentioned about it from the Vedic scriptures that it is actually referring to the um, spiritual world. And he was mentioning about, yesterday we discussed about it, that Prabhupada was mentioning about the para and the para shakti of the Lord. Today we'll go further, beginning with okay, anyone would volunteer to read one paragraph? Okay, I'll continue then. Matter itself has no creative power when it is manipulated by the living energy. Material things are produced. So, there is a book of Sri Prabhupada, Life Comes from Life, in which it's established in that conversation, I think. It's established how life, as the modern scientists propose, that life comes from matter. They say that okay, now we are not able to uh, create life from matter, but in future we will surely be able to do that. But it is just a false proposition, because matter itself has no power when it is manipulated by the living entity. For example, maybe you are sitting in a room, and there's a fan or an AC in your room. Unless you switch it on, that's not going to work. So some living entity has to go and switch on that initial thing. One has to do, you have to switch it on, only then the fan or the AC will work. So a living force is needed for the matter, for setting matter into action. When it is manipulated by the living entity, material things are produced. Matter in its crude form is therefore the latent energy of the Supreme Being. Whenever we think of energy, it is natural that we think of the source of energy. For example, when we think of electrical energy, we simultaneously think of the powerhouse where it is generated. Energy is not self sufficient. Yeah, this is a practical, again, the same example, similar example. If there is a bulb, there's a bulb in the room, or a tube light, whatever, but if it is not connected to the electric, let's say some electric, what do you say, some wire is cut off somehow, so even if you switch it on, it won't work. So the bulb has to be connected to the powerhouse, or to the power, to the source, to the properly, only then it will work. Energy is not self sufficient, so similarly the bulb itself is not sufficient. It is under the control of a superior living being. For example, fire is a source of two energies, namely light and heat. So, when there is fire, there will automatically be light and heat because they are energy of the fire. Similarly, when there is a flower, some flowers may not have fragrance, but in general, a flower will have fragrance. So, fragrance is the energy of the flower, which is the energetic. Light and heat have no independent existence outside of fire. Similarly, the inferior and superior energies are derived from a source which one may call by any name. That source of energy must be a living being with full sense of everything. So, this superior or inferior energy, it's coming from a source, and because we can see that we all have different, we are in a human forms, there are different forms. So, the supreme source from which we are coming must also have a form. It's not that from a formless thing uh, we come, we ourselves have form. So, our source must have a form. So, the concept of the impersonalist that the Supreme Lord is formless is not correct. We can understand it just by logic. If the source doesn't have form, then how we can have forms? If we have form, that shows that now you have come, like you have taken birth to your parents, they are also having some form, their parents also have some form. It's not that from a stone some creature is taking birth or something. No. So the Supreme Lord also has a form. That source of energy must be a living being with full sense of everything. That supreme living being is a personality of Godhead Sri Krishna, or the all attractive living being. The name Krishna means all attractive. So it's all attractive supreme being. Okay. So we'll go to next paragraph. Anyone would like to read?
Hare Krishna Mataji, may I read?
Yes, Mataji. Two paragraphs you can read.
From which Mataji I missed?
Are you able to see the screen? It says in the Vedas.
Yes, 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 Mataji. In the Vedas, the supreme living being or the absolute truth is called Bhagavan, the opulent one, the living being, who is the fountainhead of all energies, the discovery of the two forms of the discoveries of the two forms of limited energies by the modern scientists is just the beginning of the progress of science. Now they must go further to discover the source of the two particles or atoms which they term material and antimaterial. How can the antimaterial particle be explained? We have experience with material particles or atoms, but we have no experience with antimaterial atoms. However, the Bhagavad Gita gives the following vivid description of the antimaterial particle. This antimaterial particle is within the material body. Because of the presence of this antimaterial particle, the material body is progressively changing from childhood to boyhood, from boyhood to youth, old age, after which the antimaterial particle leaves the old unworkable body and takes up another material body. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Mataji. So, um, uh, the supreme being, or about the supreme being, it's mentioned in the Vedas. There's a vivid description about this. Who is the supreme being? Where is he? Where does he exist? I mean, where does he live? And so on. So in the Vedas, the supreme living being or the absolute truth is called Bhagavan, the opulent one. And if you remember again in the Bhagavad Gita, second chapter, in one of the purports, Srila Prabhupada mentions Bhagavan, Paramatma, and Brahman. So three aspects. The absolute truth can be understood in three aspects. The beginning is the Brahman, and then the Paramatma, and then the Bhagavan form. The opulent one, the living being who is the fountainhead of all energies. The discovery of the two forms of limited energies by the modern scientist is just the beginning of the progress of science. So, Prabhupada is appreciating that part, that at least they have begun to understand that there is something which is different from matter, anti-material particles, and also it's something different from matter, though they haven't got some the actual understanding of the spiritual existence, but at least they have begun somewhere. Now they must go further to discover the source of the two particles or atoms which they term material and antimaterial. How can the antimaterial particle be explained? We have experience with material particles. So practically, if we see, whatever we are seeing around us, it's all matter. Our body itself, the body which I've got, it's all made of matter, earth, water, fire, ether. So how do we understand about this antimaterial particle of which we have no experience? So for that we have to refer to the scriptures. In the Bhagavad Gita there is mention about it. This antimaterial particle is within the material body. So what is within the material body? That's the soul. Because of the presence of this antimaterial particle, the material body is progressively changed. So if you see second chapter again, when Krishna begins to give the instructions of Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna, the first thing he mentions is about the matter and spirit, how the spirit soul is actually different from the body. We we may be having a particular body, but the actual living entity is different from that body. So the due to the presence of that antimaterial particle, this body is going through the changes, childhood, boyhood, youth, old age, so on. After which the antimaterial particle leaves the old unworkable body and takes up another material body. You might be able to relate these things to what we are actually discussing in the Bhagavad Gita also, because presently we are discussing this portion of the characteristics of the soul, how the soul is different from the material body. So I'm sure you are able to relate to that. Next, anyone else would like to read?
Hare Krishna Mataji, I can read.
Okay, thank you, Mataji.
This description of a living body confirms the scientific discovery that energy exists in two forms. When one of them, the antimaterial particle, is separated from the material body, the latter becomes useless for all purposes. As such, the antimaterial particle is undoubtedly superior to the material energy. Mataji, should I continue?
Yes, Mataji, you can continue.
No one therefore should lament for the loss of material energy. All varieties of sense perception in the categories of heat and cold, happiness and distress are but interactions of material energy which come and go like seasonal changes. The temporary appearance and disappearance of such material interactions confirm that the material body is formed of a material energy inferior to the living force or jiva energy. Any intelligent man who is not disturbed by happiness and distress, understanding that they are different material that they are different material phases resulting from the interactions of the inferior energy, is competent to regain the anti-material world where life is eternal, full of permanent knowledge and bliss. The anti-material world is mentioned here, and in addition, information is given that in the anti-material world there is no seasonal fluctuation. Everything there is permanent, blissful, and full of knowledge. But when we speak of it as a world, we must remember that it has forms and paraphernalia of various categories beyond our material experiences.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Mataji. Okay, so just now the paragraph that was mentioned from Bhagavad Gita, if you remember, it is related to, there are a couple of verses, but beginning from 2.13, second chapter, 13th verse. And further, here also, Prabhupada is quoting from Bhagavad Gita's purports and all. So, what is Prabhupada mentioning? This description of a living body confirms the scientific discovery that energy exists in two forms. So, earlier also, Prabhupada has given a brief description of what does that material and antimaterial energy, what does it mean, para and apara shakti. When one of them, the antimaterial particle, is separated from the material body, so when the soul is separated from the material body, the later becomes useless for all purposes. So this we have practical experience, or we can understand that very well, that a person is living, but when somebody, when somebody is dead, they are lying there, their body is lying there, but still people say that okay, he has left, or जैसे हिंदी में they say like, वो चले गए. So कहाँ चले गए, वो कौन चले गए, he's still lying there. So actually what is meant, though we know, in one sense we know, but because we are so much covered, we consider that material body to be our relative, and we forget that actually the spirit soul is is actual living entity. So we can very well understand when that soul is separated, when the soul leaves the body, then the person is dead. But when the soul is present in the body, we are considered to be living. So that antimaterial particle, when separated from the material body, the later, that is the material body, becomes useless. We burn it or cremate it. As such, the antimaterial particle is undoubtedly superior to material energy. No one therefore should lament for the loss of material energy. All varieties of sense perception in the categories of, so if you see this, um, 2.14 is where Krishna mentions like all these happiness, distress, heat and cold, they are like, changing of seasons. So one must, he tells to Arjuna that you must, one must tolerate it without getting disturbed. So, all varieties of sense perception in the categories of heat and cold, happiness and distress are but interactions of material energy which come and go like seasonal changes. So, there is some distress for some point of time, so that is temporary. And if there is happiness at some point of time, that is also temporary. Sometimes in the summer season, now summer season, it's very hot. In rainy season it will be like a little bit better, and then winter season it will be cold. It will be sometimes too cold, too much cold. So but one cannot do anything about it. One has to learn to tolerate it. The temporary appearance and disappearance of such material interactions confirm that the material body is formed of a material energy inferior to the living force. So, our body, we can see our body is actually made up of what? Earth, water, fire, ether, all these material elements. But we, I mean, this is just a covering, but we are actually spiritual beings, or that spirit soul, or that anti-material particle. Any intelligent man who is not disturbed by happiness and distress, understanding that they are different material phases resulting from the interactions of the inferior energy, is competent to regain the antimaterial world where life is eternal, full of peace. So, Sachidananda, the Lord, and his abode is what? Eternal. The Lord is Sachidananda. Sat is eternal, Chit is full of knowledge, Ananda is full of bliss. So, we, being parts and parcels of the Lord, are also eternal, full of knowledge, full of bliss. But because we identify ourselves with this material body, that I'm a male, I'm a female, I'm an Indian, I'm a resident of so and so, or I'm a daughter or the son of so and so, because we identify ourselves with these material designations. So um, we our present state is what? Asat, Achit and Nirananda, means temporary. We experience temporality, and then lack of knowledge or ignorance, and we are always in distress, always in, miserable. So but actually our state is what? Sachidananda. So we are in an unnatural state at present. The antimaterial world is mentioned here, and in addition, information is given that in the antimaterial world there is no seasonal fluctuation. So, because it is as a scientist, when they proposed that portion was mentioned from some news release, there were 3 points mentioned. Something like antimaterial world or antimaterial particle is completely opposite or different to the material elements. So, something like that, which means the material things are what? Temporary, whereas the anti-material or the spiritual things, they are permanent. There is no fluctuation of heat and cold, dualities. There is no dualities there. Everything there is permanent, blissful, and full of knowledge. You just imagine permanent happiness. Of course, there is no distress in the spiritual world. So there is permanent happiness. You are full of knowledge and you are ever blissful. I mean, there is no question of getting a knee pain or somebody told you something and you are disturbed. There is no question of all these things. Just imagine. Wouldn't we aspire to go to that place. That's our actual home. But when we speak of it as a world, we must remember that it has forms and paraphernalia of various categories beyond our material experiences. So, at present, we cannot experience, we have no experience of the spiritual world. All we can understand is from the scriptures. All we can understand is from the scriptures. So, I will stop here. Uh, Yeah, you can please share some points, or if you have any queries, please feel free. We can discuss on it. You can, if you're not able to speak, also you can write it down in the chat box. Okay, if nobody has anything, I have a question that we have no experience of this anti-material world we just discussed. So, when we are in this material body, how are we going to, like, what's the hope for us to experience or to have a glimpse or to understand about that anti-material world or the spiritual world?
Hare Krishna Mataji. Actually, my daughter is crying so much. That's why I'm not fully attentive in the class. Sorry for today.
Okay, yeah, no problem. Thank you for informing. Okay, Aditi Mataji or Pratyusha Mataji. I would encourage Pratyusha Mataji if you can also participate. If you're not, it's not possible for you to speak, then you can type it in the chat box. Whatever is comfortable, आप लिख सकते हो चैट बॉक्स में या फिर अनम्यूट करके बोल सकते हो.
Hare Krishna Mataji. I want to share my views that this anti-material particle is the, I think it's the soul of the body. हाँ बेटा, 1 minute. Give me just 1 minute. Actually, his father is left for West Bengal. He has election duties, so she is crying so much.
Oh, okay, no problem. You can see.
Yes, Mataji, yes. I think everyone cares for this material body, but the real life or everything lies in this anti-material particles. So, just for today, I just want to say this only. Hare Krishna.
Okay, thank you so much, Mataji. Yes, that is what Prabhupada was mentioning, that um, the antimaterial particle is more important than the matter, because without it, the material body is of no use. Thank you for highlighting that point. Anything else? What about answer to my question? With this material body in our material consciousness, how do we get to understand about this antimaterial world? Is there any hope for us, or there is no hope? If there is no hope, why are we discussing all these things? No answer means it seems everybody is doubtful what we are doing here. Shall I take it that way?
Mataji, please repeat the question.
My question was, with when we have this material body which is made of matter, so we are how we can have that experience or proper understanding or that taste for the anti-material world.
I think that's why we are practicing Krishna consciousness to have that taste of spiritual world through our spiritual guru. And self-realization is also necessary for this. So all these things we are doing just to realize ourselves and have the taste of that anti-material world. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Mataji. Before we conclude that answer, anybody else would like to say something?
Hari Krishna Mataji, I also have similar thoughts as Mataji. I think by knowing that the bodily attachment we have, and because of which we face a lot of the distress is there because of this bodily attachment, I feel. So we need to remind ourselves by developing that consciousness, that Krishna consciousness within us, that we are just the soul. And once maybe we are not very much attached to this material body, and if we start using it only for the purpose of developing that consciousness, maybe then we'll have that taste, and maybe we can experience that anti-material bliss. That's it, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Mataji, for the answer. Okay, I'm waiting for one more answer. Okay, seeing the time limitations, will conclude. So, yes, in our present body, we have no experience, but by hearing and seeing how the acharyas, what they experience, and following Mahajanayana Gatasapanta, and they have chalked out the path for us. If we follow that, we can also have experience of that spiritual existence. So if we follow that, then we will be able to, because those who have followed, that is the acharyas, they have they are experiencing, they have experienced it, and they have mentioned it in the scriptures, in the Bhagavatam, or in the shlokas by Srila Rupa Goswami and the Goswamis and all. So from that we can understand that okay, this is how it is, and there is a quite detailed description of the spiritual world in the Bhagavatam. So by reading, hearing these, we can understand that yes, it is there and we must aspire for it. And yes, the process is to like that path is to follow this process of devotional life, Krishna consciousness, and that's how our senses will be purified. And yeah, Gurudev mentioned it in one class, that with this material senses we may not be able to experience, but with the purified senses we can experience, we can see Krishna face to face. But we have to purify our senses, and the process to purify the senses is this devotional. Now presently what our eyes want to see, some material, some beautiful picture or something, but we have to purify it so that the eyes will be just attached to see the beautiful form of the Lord. We may want to eat something very delicious, but we have to purify our tongue to the level that okay, I want to have only taste only Krishna prasadam, and of course not become greedy for prasadam, but just to honor the prasadam. So all these things, so briefly, if we just in one line answer is yes, we have to follow the process, then we'll be able to, with faith we have to follow the process, then we will be able to. get that taste. Okay, so I think we'll conclude for now, and thank you so much for joining and making this 8:30 time session successful, because there were many who had confirmed to join, but yeah, I need to check with them. But thank you so much for joining. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Mataji, Standut Pranam.
Thank you, Mataji. Hare Krishna.